welcome to the official Rubicon Challenge podcast. I'm Anna, and today I'm just so thrilled to introduce our guest. Richard Gerver joined us a few weeks ago to talk about perception and learning, and I really recommend you listen to that episode if you haven't. And today we're diving a little deeper into the role of education for the future of our democracies. It's mid-December, and we're just coming out of the US election, and a lot of question marks have been raised about democratic institutions and that we have been taking for granted for a long time. And Richard talks to us about what that could mean for education and how we can create better humans and maybe reconsider how we organize work, education, and public institutions. I hope you enjoy it. Thanks for listening. All right. Hi, Richard. How are you today? Good morning. Oh, I guess not morning anymore.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm really good. And you know, today is, as we're recording this, today's V-Day. That's what we're calling it, right? V-Day. Today is the day that the first vaccines went in the arms of the first general public recipients here in the UK. And I was saying earlier, it's amazing that the second, this is for those people that ever do like quizzes, you know, general knowledge quizzes. Because this is one you need to remember. The second member of the public outside of the trials and tests to receive the first vaccine, the second person was a man called William Shakespeare, right? You couldn't make it up. So today is a day of poetic hopefulness. That's all I can say, you know. The bard has delivered yet again.
Absolutely. Oh God, that's just so confusing because now there are going to be two really famous William Shakespeares to keep track of. So in 100 years, that's going to start getting messy.
It is, and particularly spooky. They both come from the same part of the UK.
No,
I mean,
do they?
Yeah, that's really weird, right? They both come from the same. I wonder if this William Shakespeare, we can actually track back to being a relative of the other William Shakespeare. We're just going to have to call them.
Me. Yeah.
William Shakespeare Senior and William Shakespeare Junior from now on.
Yes, exactly. Wow, that's really interesting. Yeah, so we're starting off this kind of move through the pandemic, and like after this whole year, there's finally some serious hope and injections are being made, which is, it seems a little bit surreal actually. It's just, I can't really wrap my head around it.
You're right. You know, it's really funny because we've lived in a world that has been so pessimistic with an like a vacuum of hope really for the best part of 10 months now, that even a glimmer, even a little sparkle somehow doesn't feel real. It almost feels fantastical. And you're right, you know, I mean, you can imagine the poor woman who was the first recipient of the vaccine. Again, for anyone who's listening who loves quizzes, just so they know, her name was Maggie Keegan, right? That's the name of the first woman ever to receive the vaccine in the public was Maggie Keegan, and she had the injection from a nurse called Nurse May. I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? Because actually, these are going to be historic facts in 200 years' time.
This is going to be a Rosa Parks thing.
Exactly, right? Yeah. So Nurse May delivered the first vaccine to Maggie Keegan, who was a woman who's going to be 91 years old next week. Right.
Wow.
So, but you can imagine this poor woman, right? This poor 91-year-old woman, right, is sat in a chair, and the entire world's media is like filming in. This moment. This poor 91-year-old woman is the entire world is watching her receive this vaccine. So I hope she wasn't too scared of the needle. Can you imagine? But even that, you know, even watching that this morning live on the news at 6:30 UK time, all the news cut to it, unbelievable, felt fantastical. It didn't feel real. And you're right, we've almost got to a point now where we don't dare to dream. We don't dare to hope. Because it's been so long since we've had something tangible to really grasp onto. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, extraordinary times, that's for sure. So I know how you feel.
Yeah, it's just like, I'm trying to sum up this like 2020 year. And I mean, I'm so glad to have you back on the podcast that we can talk about things again. So, I mean, how would you sum up your 2020? Where's your head at now?
God. Geez, wow. How many days have we got to talk about this, right? I mean, it is extraordinary when I think, I mean, it's so, there are little moments that I blame social media for. This morning, I had a little, every so often on Facebook, it pops up with a photograph or a memory from this day, whenever, right?
Yeah.
And I got one from this day 5 years ago. And I was stood at St. Pancras Station in London, which for those of the people that don't know, is the Eurostar hub in London, right? And it's a beautiful Victorian, architecturally significant building. Absolutely. I mean, it's magnificent. It's, we don't do very much well in the UK, but building train stations, we're world class.
That's your jam. Yeah.
We're really good at train stations.
That's your stuff.
And that's what we're good at. Just give me some wrought iron and we can do miraculous things with it, right? And so we had this, I mean, I was stood there 5 years, and they always build this unbelievable Christmas tree that spans, for just meters up into the air, because it's this huge building. And so this image popped up on my screen today. And I don't know how many of you've seen Love Actually, the movie.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So
Just
where, at the beginning, at the end, where people are hugging and greeting and saying,
it gets me every time. Yeah.
There you go. So I remember 5 years ago having that moment. I was just coming back from a speaking event in Europe on the Eurostar. And I stood looking at this Christmas tree, and people crying and hugging and kissing and saying goodbye and saying hello, ready for the Christmas holidays, and just capturing the moment. Anyway, this is a long-winded answer, isn't it? And this is how it's going to be. Anyway, so the picture popped up on my phone this morning, and I had that weird feeling of real sadness, because it's at moments like that when it comes into focus, you realize what you've lost, right?
Yes.
And what that said to me is, this year, the things I truly love professionally in particular. I've been very lucky personally. I haven't been touched by the tragedy that many, many people have. I've lost a friend or two, but I haven't lost people I dearly love, right? So for me, a lot of the loss has been professional. And it's moments like that, standing at a train station as you're coming home, looking forward to seeing your family and relatives after a really productive trip, having been stood on a stage, which is the thing I love doing more than anything else, feeling the energy of a live audience, sharing my passion and the things I believe in and all those sorts of things. And so all of those emotions stirred weirdly this morning for me. That said, and it brought back the focus of the profound sense of loss of what we've all given up in the last 12 months. But those are the things that felt acute for me today. But then again, juxtaposed with that, as we've just talked about, V-Day and the vaccine, that weird juxtaposition of hope, because suddenly thinking, well, actually, if things go well, by this time next year, I could be stood under that same tree, having come back from doing what I love doing, right? Preparing for a Christmas with my friends and family. So I think that pretty much sums up my year. Moments of profound desperation and sadness, particularly the absence of hope, because really until very, very recently, I don't think any of us had any understanding of when this might end, if it might end, how it might end, what it's going to do for our lives. And this little chink of light now that there may be a tomorrow. And I think, depending on how I've slept each night and partly how much alcohol I may have consumed the evening before, has governed how that ebb and flow has gone. But I would describe the year as one of profound intensity, intense emotion, intense mood swings, just intensity, intense moments of love, when I've been able to look my wife in the eyes and we've been together and realize just how important we've been to each other this year to get through this, of picking my son up from university last week and hugging him because I haven't seen him since September, of still not having seen my mother since February live. So I guess for me, this is a very long-winded way of saying it's been a year of complete intensity. And yeah, that's the best way I can describe it, I guess.
Yeah, I totally recognize myself in how you're telling this, because for me, it's been a feeling of kind of being being dipped into different buckets of extreme feelings, of extreme emotions, like extreme sadness, happiness, and then just kind of getting confused about what all of it is where it's going, and where am I in this? So it's kind of a feeling of being thrown into different states with myself and different situations that I have to just figure out as I go, but also kind of centering down on myself and kind of figuring out, okay, but given that I can't control any of this, what do I need to move forward? What do I need today, this morning? Do I need a second cup of tea? Do I need to go for a walk? All those like small, just maintenance things. Like, yes, I need a solid 8 hours sleep, because otherwise everything else is going to break down, and I can't have that right now. So I think it's that kind of paradoxical feeling that you're also describing. It's like the big and the small at the same time, and in a different way that we're used to.
Yeah, I absolutely, you know, it's funny, the abiding memory I have this year, I can't remember if I've told you this before, you know, what has been my greatest, I, I wrote about this in a blog a few months ago, and people have been laughing about it since. One of the great joys of my year, talk about tiny things, right, has been, I created a sweet onion hummus recipe, and I make sweet onion hummus every Saturday morning
Oh,
that we
wow.
have on a Saturday evening and a Sunday evening, right? With, you know, some vegetables and some potato chips and stuff. And, you know, if somebody asked me for my prevailing memory of 2020, it's my sweet onion hummus. I mean, what can I tell you? And if somebody had said to me a year ago, the most profound success of 2020 for me would have been making sweet onion hummus, I would have told them they were crazy, but there you go.
Exactly. But I think that's really that's like a really good ability to be able to celebrate those victories, and to be able to kind of recognize, like, well, this is something that gives me comfort and gives everybody else joy, and I'm going to have to ask you for that recipe later, because that sounds delicious.
Deal.
Good, thank you. Oh, wow. So I was thinking that we could kind of use our time today to just head off in the direction of your forte, which is education, and kind of see where that goes. Because I mean, we're just coming out of the US election and the implications of democracy, and we have some shakings in Europe as regard to democracy as well. And I was trying to kind of get a sense of how education plays into democracy, and kind of like, because obviously those two are intertwined, but how can we make that better going forward? What do you see? What is your experience? How can we think? Because I mean, democracy in its basic form is about making, like, disagreeing but kind of agreeing on which way we're going to go. So it's like this union of different opinions. It's not everybody agreeing, it's accommodating for different opinions. So, and where would you go with that? Where would you start, Richard?
You know, it's such a massive issue, Anna, and in so many ways, if we regard this right, if we really reflect on this right, I think it particularly within education, it throws up many of the challenges and directions we need to consider. You know, like everything else, and it's weird again, isn't it, the juxtaposition of this moment in political history that has been thrown up at the same time as the pandemic, right? I mean, it's to me, there's almost a weird natural interlinking in all of this, you know, because in some ways, on a very personal level, and I know people will have very different opinions of this, I think that the pandemic is the full stop at the end of what has been an extreme period of human darkness. And I think that started potentially really in its accelerated form. It started with the global financial crisis in 2007 and 8, and has prevailed now for 12 years. And I do think there's an interlinking, because, you know, what have we seen in that 12 years? We've seen massive gaps in the haves and have-nots around the world, you know, increased environmental crises, increased economic crisis, increase in socio-ethnic challenges, and a lack of global cohesion, which has led to polarized political views, the rise of extreme politics, We've seen the growth of divisive world leaders like Bolsonaro in Brazil, Trump in the US, the rise of the extreme right in Europe, Brexit, all of those things, right? Now, what's really interesting to me as an educator is to say, okay, why? What could I have done differently? And what do I learn from this to make sure that future generations do it better? Because I'm also a profound optimist, right? And this is, I absolutely believe, and I think we talked about this briefly in the last podcast, I absolutely believe that we are coming to the end of an era of human darkness. And the end of every era of human darkness is always followed by an explosion, a human renaissance, a great period of creativity, of innovation, of humanity, right?
Yes.
So again, as an educator, these are the things that are constantly kind of bubbling around in my head, and particularly this year when I've had more time than most years to sit in my little white cupboard, which other people might not see but you can, my little white box, where I've just been brewing on these ideas, right? And some really interesting things I think punctuate the response to what you're saying. The first is this: let's think about the traditional model of education, right? The traditional model of mass education was really built to help create an economic platform for societies to grow. And the absolutely correct decision that the more educated, more skilled, more knowledgeable your population are, the more employable they become, the more innovative they are, the more they can contribute to society and hopefully create the cycle of economic well-being and growth, right? And in many ways, we see it now in developing nations where education is front and center of any society's development. Yes. So when our education system was designed, we were living at the cusp of an industrial revolution, right? In many ways, mass education was first actually created by religious groups, the church, but then taken over in a more kind of civil way to create an educated society to fire the Industrial Revolution. So education was predicated on wanting to make sure people developed the traditional cognitive skills, that they were really good technically, that they could get their heads down and be really efficient in a workplace. So all of those things were reflected in the design of education correctly, right? Everything focused on cognition, everything focused on the transference of fixed knowledge, of fixed skills. And young children were trained to become efficient, very much in that Taylorist model of efficiency, right?
Exactly. And then you also have the implication that children's developments go through stages, and at 18 it just flattens out, so it stops. You have these 18 years to make an impression and to form your citizens in accordance with the overarching design of society,
and to put them into the right funnel, right? Exactly. So if you're academic, these are the routes you go down. If you're good with your hands, these are the routes you go down. If you're cerebral, you go down this route. If you're artistic, boom, 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 right? And but the reward, right? And now this is really where I think where we're living in current times links very powerfully. The reward, we were always told, if you went down the route that was suggested, if you did what you were told in the way you were told, if you learned what you had to learn and you did the best you could, the reward was a life of certainty. Now, that didn't mean it was luxury. It didn't mean it was superstardom. It didn't mean it was a life of certainty. So whether you were ended up working on the floor of a factory, whether you ended up working in an office building, whatever it was, the reward for going down the correct route and doing what you were told in the way you were told, and then when you got into that workplace, that you got your head down and you did the best you could do in the job you had, you would be rewarded with certainty, a salary that would put food on the table, that might give you the economic prowess to be able to afford to buy a home or rent a nice-ish property, to have a family, right? To build a pension, to work through your life so that, again, the reward at the end of that journey would be a life where you could relax into retirement, where you would earn the right to have all those certain things, right? That was the model. Now,
that's really interesting. Can I just jump in there? Because I love how you explain that so clearly, because you can kind of see the relationship with creating stable companies and structures in society that builds on the stable evolution and growth of individuals. And I just find it like, when did certainty become so important? Like the overarching goal for everything is supposed to be certain. Like I can plan for 5 years, whether I'm in my business or in my private life. When did that become so important? Why is that important?
Yeah, and that's the point, right? Because it was predicated so much, I think, on that kind of basic Taylorist model of, if life is centered around efficiency, efficiency is the answer to everything.
Yes.
Because efficiency leads to productivity, productivity leads to profitability, the profit goes back into a focus on efficiency. And it really comes down, Anna, to control, right? Yeah. Because the human instinct is to control. Yes. Sadly, although, and this is again really interesting, potent with education, because as young children, we're born to explore. Our curiosity, our creativity is fired. We want adventure, right? We live in a world that is totally unknown as young children. Every day as a young emerging human being is different. There are no 2 days the same. There is no pursuit of certainty. There is no pursuit of control. There is just a pursuit that is driven by the primal instinct to want to know more, to explore, to be more, right? But then what's happened is we live in a society which is predicated on safety first, and safety is built around certainty. So what we do is we pull children out of that naturally deeply curious state, which as adults we find uncomfortable and dangerous, and we push ourselves, all of us, into this reward of certainty is good, certainty is safe. It's why we become more risk averse as we get older, right? Young children will take risks which, okay, sometimes are dangerous. So we need to be careful to make sure we help our kids not fall off a 90-floor building, right? But the point is, we go too far the other way in a pursuit of complete control, and we become obsessed with it. And then we become obsessed as we become older with protect what you have. You know, I remember a number of years ago talking with some of the, talking to many of the senior executives at some of the world's most innovative tech companies. And they all say the same thing. When we started our journey, it was really exciting because anything went, any idea, we'd try it, any avenue we'd go down. But they said, actually, the greatest challenge to us has been our success, because the more successful we've become, the more we have to lose. The more we have to lose, the more risk averse we become, because the more focused on protection we get, right? Yes. And the same is true, I think, of most people's human journey and evolution. And so we've lived down this route within education. And I think this is where we get to the current times we're living in. You know, the polarization, the anger, the hatred, the extremism. Because, and I remember hearing this from a brilliant, brilliant person in 2018, Minouche Shafik, who might not be somebody who's a name most people will recognize, but I urge people to look her up. Minouche Shafik is currently the lead director at the London School of Economics, and she was until quite recently. Many people thought she would break one of the great glass ceilings in the UK by becoming the first female governor of the Bank of England. Unfortunately, politics got in the way, but there's still hope. I hope it happens. She's a genius, right? And at 2018, at the World Economic Forum in Davos, she made the exact point that I'm leading to here, which is that the vast majority of people who voted for populist parties over the last decade aren't stupid, they're not bad, they're not evil, they're good, hard-working people, right? Most of them good, hard-working, working-class people who have had to graft for everything they've achieved in their lives. But the problem is they've started to work out that the world they were educated to live in doesn't exist anymore. And actually what they've realized is that the world is now loaded against them, despite the fact that they got their heads down when they were young children. They learnt what they were told to learn. They went down the routes and tributaries they were told to go down. And that the reward they were promised, which was certainty, job, mortgage, pension,
It's
doesn't
gone.
exist.
No, it's gone.
And so they now feel lied to. And who do they blame? They blame the people that they see as the ones that gave them the promise and took them down the routes in the first place. So that is, if you like, the establishment. And so what we're seeing now is a bit like a domino effect, right? Generation after generation of people. Education hasn't changed. We're still basically educating people the same way, predicated on do this, trust me, and you will be rewarded with certainty. And so the generations now are piling up as that certainty doesn't exist. And what we've arrived at over the last 14 or 15 years, the economic crisis and now a global pandemic, are accelerants that have just shown people that these things are less and less obtainable. So people are becoming angrier, they're becoming less trustful of authority. And I think that's why we've ended up in the very polarized, very dangerous, very angry world we live in now, where conspiracy theories thrive, where loud, charismatic voices like that of Donald Trump or Bolsonaro or Marine Le Pen become so persuasive, because what they speak to are anti-establishment. And if we're serious about creating a better world, again, sorry about this long-winded rant.
No, you're doing fine.
If we're serious about creating a better world, we have to change the way we prepare people to live in it. And that means we have to start with education.
Yes, exactly. And I totally agree, because I mean, I've just read a bunch of sociology this fall, and I'm just leaping off of Giddens and Berger-Luckman, and just accepting the fact that society and all of its institutions and democracy in itself is just something that we have made up. This is just a social construction that we have decided that this is going to work, this is how we're going to do it. And then, of course, all of these institutions are dependent on the social reproduction of the institutions, that we all have to kind of grow up in an environment that, oh, this is the world, this is how society works, and these are the institutions that are going to help you through life. And we need to get that, like, be socialized in that kind of thinking in order to move forward. But now we're having a rift in that certainty. We're having a question mark after our institutions, and that's going to have an impact in how democracy is reproduced in the next generation, obviously. And of course, education has a huge role in stepping in and kind of not filling the void, but exploring it and using it, and kind of, because I guess democracy is not something, or I guess education in the huge sense of the word, it's not about what the individual knows, but it's about what we know together.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, you know, again, this word democracy becomes so powerful, because if you add in to the mix what we've just talked about, together with digital technology, right, and the way that social media now is being scientifically used to manipulate thought and opinion, and particularly for susceptible people, right? And this is a massive challenge, because people are angry, they're vulnerable, they're susceptible. They don't know where to glean curated, well, no, that's the wrong word. They don't know where to glean fact from fiction or manipulation, right? In education, the formal education system has been stripped so much back to teaching the basics, which, you know, I've no problem, by the way. I want all kids to be literate and numerate. I'm not anti any of those things, right? But they have been stripped so far back to just working on efficiency models around the core skills and knowledge, right? That schools and school systems are now jettisoning teaching current affairs or democracy or physics or politics. And so what we're left with is a society that, and I'm not using this in a condemning way, who are ignorant, and as a result are open to manipulation. And when that manipulation is as sophisticated as you can now get on social and digital media, right, we're all susceptible. So whether it's anti-vaxxers and the enormous conspiracies around vaccination, whether it's the political or anti-establishment political views that are being, you know, driven on all sides of the argument, not just one side or another. You know, we have never needed, and of course, kids are now more susceptible than any because of the deep usage of technology that they have through social media. You know, the problem is we're in this perfect storm of ignorance and digital accessibility. So accessibility to information has never been bigger and more accessible. But the ignorance around how to use it, how to understand it, how to analyze it, how to question and challenge it has also never been greater. So we're living in this storm where we have angry generations of people, rightly. We have a society whose general three-dimensional education is getting narrower, and a digital manipulation platform which is able to control our thoughts and opinions in a way never before. That is a perfect storm. And it's why, unless we do something really quite dramatic around the redesign of education, we cannot blame ourselves if we continue to go further down that rabbit hole. And most importantly, and really worryingly, that future generations start to question democracy itself. Because, you know, one of the things I really fear is the increasing number of people who now feel that democracy doesn't work. And that's really scary, scary, I think,
it is.
right? And so we have to, you know, you look at what's going on in the US at the moment, and the fact that 70 million people genuinely believe that democracy has failed them because Donald Trump didn't win the election. Yeah. I mean, that's terrifying stuff, right? And the point is, it's too late now to reason with those people because they have been so deeply manipulated. And for, you know, they are good intentioned people and they're not stupid, most of them. And they're good, hardworking people. But we're now in a position where the very home of what is supposed to be the greatest democracy in the world is now 50% of its population doesn't believe in democracy anymore. And what does that do then for the rest of the world?
Exactly.
And, you know, I go back, maybe I'm being grandiose, but if we don't shift, education has to be the answer, Anna. It has to be.
Yeah. And I think we also have to kind of attack the question of education on multiple fronts, because obviously we need to do better with kids, but we also need to do better with adults. So I think businesses and companies have a huge role to play in how we develop adults through their working life. Because, I mean, like you were saying, in the old paradigm, or in the, I guess, still current paradigm, we educate up until, I guess, 25 if you go to university. And then you're stuck in a company, you're sticking there, you have your skill resume, you have your stuff, you know, and then you just keep working. And you might go to different companies, you do similar work, but that's what you do. You do your work, you don't evolve, you don't learn. You might go to some course maybe, or something like in depth for what you're doing, but none of that kind of broad explorative stuff that, you know, like kids do, like kids want to do. But it's trained out of us, like you were referring to. And I think if we could have like a business culture that promotes self-growth and self-awareness and curiosity as a way of life, like we were talking about in the last episode that you were with us, I think that could really also strengthen society and democracy in the long run. But I was just kind of thinking about something that when you were talking about 70 million adults not believing in democracy, because I think there's been just a slight gliding of what it means to be in a democracy. Because I just heard interviews with people coming out of the election that voted for Trump, and they feel cheated about not winning because I voted. I told my kids to vote because it's important, and then we didn't win. So my vote didn't count for anything. And it's like, well, you don't get a medal for participating. You don't get to win just because you're in there. You have to, that's not how it works. And I recognize that same reasoning from the companies I work with, that like, oh, we can't have everybody in the workforce, all of our employees weigh in on this issue because then everybody think they're going to have their way. It's like, no, they don't. That's not the case, because they just want to be heard. They want all of the arguments put on the table, and then we can make a decision. And not everybody's going to be happy, but everybody's going to be heard.
You know, it's such a powerful, sorry, Anna, to interrupt you. It's such a powerful point, because you're so right. And also, you know, what people have to understand is because their opinion does matter actually, and it does count, right? And also, you know, in a world where I still think we're squandering human resources because we're not harvesting the opinions and thoughts of everybody. And by the way, in a company, the greatest idea could come from the person on the lowest pay grade. You've just got to ask them and create the structure to allow them to feel confident enough to contribute. But the other point is, you take democracy, right? If anyone genuinely believes that Biden's presidency will not be informed by the fact that 70 million people didn't vote for him, they are stupid. Because the truth about democracy is you may not win the election, but your voice has been heard. And because of the nature of politics, and politicians' reflex is one of survival and control, right? They know that the next time round, they are going to have to actually find a way to resonate to you, whether you voted for Trump or not. We're already hearing those debates. Now, the same thing is true in a company or organization, right? Because any organization that is successful in its organic development needs to know what its people feel. And if a person feels they're being heard, then actually they're prepared to be part of it. They believe they belong. And also, although their opinion may not be the one you want to go down now, subconsciously, managers and leaders will have taken that on board and will use it for evolution and development. And even if it's something that just germinates down the track in a few months or years. The problem, the other danger of what you're describing is we do live in echo chambers. And if all we do is surround ourselves with the voices of people who agree with us, there will be no innovation and no create. You know, we need to remember that creativity and innovation actually comes from conflict. The example I always give is the Beatles, right?
Yes, exactly.
So Lennon and McCartney, actually, they adored and loved each other, but their worldview was completely polar opposite, and particularly when it came to the creation of music. But it was the synergy of those two diverse opinions that gave the world the music of the Beatles, right? And whether it's that or anything else, the danger is if all we do is surround ourselves with clones of ourselves, we end up in an echo chamber and companies stagnate, and that's the biggest problem. But again, you know what? That goes back to education, and it goes back to this point about the pursuit of efficiency and certainty. Because in school, we're taught the same thing in the same way. We're taught to have the same opinions about that there is a certain track of knowledge and a certain set of skills that we all have to possess. So in other words, we're taught to be uniform. Now, I'm not saying in a civilized society there shouldn't be an understanding of civility, of uniformity, of laws, of regulations. I'm not an anarchist, right? But what I do believe is we spend too much time trying to get everybody to believe to follow the leader and not enough time on creating disparate views and opinions. And again, you look at the pursuit of science. You know, in the last podcast, I talked about Barry Barish, the Nobel Prize winner.
Yes.
You know, again, one of the things he wanted was conflict. He wanted differing opinions and differing experiences, because that's the only way you drive forward innovation. The problem is we're taught from a really young age to conform in totality and do what you're told by the people who are our superiors. And our superiors expect that same level of conformity down the line. And then in the next breath, people go, don't understand why we're not more innovative.
Exactly. Oh, this ties in so perfectly. I just read it's in Swedish, but it's Sigmund Bauman, Modernity and the Holocaust. And he basically, I'm sure you've read it. He makes the point that, well, the Holocaust as a system was only possible because of the invention of bureaucracy, because of the systems created only based on efficiency and rationality, and how rationality came to be more important than ethics, because there was this implication that the system, in its efficiency and rationality, that also included humanism and also included ethics. So the individual never had to take that thought into their minds. Like, what is the ethic decision for me to make here? What do I do with my work? And it's so interesting that you say, because he also talks about bureaucracy as a form that, it's like you're saying, it's not designed to produce innovation. It was always designed to make the most efficient way to do something. That was the entire purpose, to be more efficient, to be more cost efficient, to be faster, smarter. That was the whole thing. And I'm going to drop another one on you, just to put my screen on here. This guy, Gary Hamel, picks up the same point 60 years on. It's just the same thing. Like, bureaucracies will forever hamper our ability to think, because that's not what it's designed to do.
Yep. I mean, and that's exactly the point. If you think about it, the human being in the workplace is actually traditionally designed not to be a human being, but a machine.
Yes.
You know what and it's another reason why the world has to change dramatically around education, because AI is already taking over all of those things we were training human beings to do in the workplace, right? And so the only thing that will set companies apart now will not be efficiency, because machines do that. Technology does that, right? The thing that will define a company's success or failure in the future will be its connection to humanity. That is the last great bastion that marks the human species out, right? It's humanity, its creativity, its innovation, its ability to do the irrational are all the things that will actually define the future of a successful business. And again, the great challenge is, given whenever we live through tough times, whether it be a pandemic or a global financial crisis, we resort back to safety mode. And safety mode is all around that efficiency. And therefore, we almost dehumanize what we do in order to survive.
Exactly.
And in a way, the Holocaust, and the reason it resonates is I come from a Jewish background. I remember my great aunts and uncles, my great grandparents showing me the tattoos on their arms because they were fortunate enough to survive, right? So it's very pertinent to me. But that was all about, and how do you get those people in those death camps to do the bidding of the evil that was Nazism? You do it by actually creating human beings as machines. You dehumanize Jewish people. You dehumanize people who are gay. You dehumanize gypsies. You dehumanize those people. And therefore it becomes a process about efficiency. How do we rebuild Germany after the reparations of the First World War? We rebuild our economy. What way do we know to rebuild economy? Efficiency, mechanism, dehumanization. And actually that's the great fear at the moment, that companies don't slide, I'm not trying to equate it with the Holocaust, God forbid. But what we don't do is slide now into an era of dehumanization and efficiency post-COVID, right?
Yes, exactly.
Actually, because post-COVID means that we have to learn, if we learn nothing else, if we're going to survive as a species, we need to be more flexible, more creative, more innovative, not less so. We can't lock down again. We have to go in the opposite direction. And the fear around education again is, the narrative right now is catch up, catch up, catch up. We need kids to catch up on everything they've lost or forgotten in the education. We need to make sure they don't miss out on the literature they should have read, or the history they needed to be taught, or the science terms, right? And so the danger for me around the next 5 to 10 years of education is we go back into a dehumanized efficiency model of education where we just try and play catch up. And we couldn't do a worse thing for the next generation of our children. And so, you're absolutely right. I think there's a really interesting conflict right now about humanization versus dehumanization, efficiency versus opportunity. And I think it's absolutely central to the debates we all need to be having.
Yes, agreed. And I think it's just so interesting to see how we're collectively kind of defaulting back to that old way of thinking, and we're chasing certainty, we're chasing control, and we're trying to figure out given that this is where I'm at now, I'm going to revert to catching up on whatever, whether I'm in my business or in school, and just kind of building on what I know have worked in the past, instead of realizing, that probably won't work. I need to do something else. And what will that look like? So I think it's a hard job for education to kind of really scrutinize itself and see that, okay, so we're still educating as if we're in the 1920s for the factories and for the businesses and for all of these funnels that you described so vividly. What do we need to do now? What's the next step?
Well, the first thing, is to understand what is the biggest driver of constraint. And the biggest driver of constraint is the way we still assess and measure success in education, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, the best analogy I often give is this one. Imagine you take, and this is where the problem has been, because the instinct of educators and actually most of society is that we need to reform education. There are very few people I meet outside of traditional politicians who say, no, we need to preserve the system we have. Most of the people, so in the companies you work in, most people are going, oh yeah, we need to change education because the workforce aren't what we need them to be. Whether it's parents who are saying we're dissatisfied, we don't like the model, etc. So there's very few people who actually say, oh no, we've got to, but unfortunately the people that say it are the ones that actually seem to have control and power, because as we've already talked about, their entire world centers on control and therefore efficiency. And the idea of taking risks and expansive thinking just doesn't work. But the best analogy I can give is because assessment, so you hear educators a lot say, we'd love to transform education, but while our kids are still being assessed in the same way and have to attain the same qualifications, we can't take that risk. And in a way, they're right, because sadly, the qualifications are still the keys to the kingdom, right?
Yes.
They're becoming less so because more and more major organizations are realizing that graduates aren't necessarily the answer and all this kind of stuff, but they are still the keys to the kingdom. And any parent would say, even me, somebody as passionate as I am, when my kids went through the system, I wanted them to get the qualifications they needed to open up the doors that gave them choice, right?
Of course.
And that is the problem, because it's a bit like turning round to one of the world's great innovative chefs. I don't know, somebody like Ferran Adria, right? Heston Blumenthal.
Yes.
And saying, go create something new. Use your genius to create something new. But whatever you create has to look and taste just like this chocolate cake.
Yeah.
That's the problem, right?
Yeah.
That's the problem we're stuck in right now. So whenever we talk about innovation in education, because the outcome is still the same, the outcome measure, even the most innovative educators end up coming back to efficiency. So if it's talking about how do we use technology to be more creative, how do we use the arts or the humanities to be more creative, how do we use curiosity and young children's ability to think creatively to be more innovative, the problem is we always circle back to actually saying, yeah, but how do we use that to be more efficient? Because we're still being measured against the chocolate cake. And so in a way, the first step has to be, we have to have the courage to say, we need to change the model of assessing performance. And actually, we need to understand that when somebody like me says that, I'm not I'm not anti-assessment. Again, far from it. I'm not anti being held to account. I absolutely believe that as educators, we should be held to account in the same way that medics are held to account for how many people they cure, right? But the difference is medics are constantly innovating. If we continue to treat people the way we did 150 years ago, the death rates would be through the roof still, right? The reason we're treating people better is because medics have been allowed to innovate. And what we've got to do in education is do the same thing, right? And then design new ways to hold us to account. So let us not just build a chocolate cake, let us build something new, but then hold us to account. Does it taste nice? Is it gorgeous to eat? Is it something I want more of? But doesn't have to be chocolate cake, right?
Exactly.
And that's the challenge. Do we have the courage to allow the system to evolve and then find new ways to hold it to account? And those new ways of accountability need to be evolutionary too, because the truth is that what's important now will not be important in 20 years' time. And so we need to create a system which is always self-reflective and self-evaluative, but we need to create a system that has the opportunity to evolve.
Yes. Wow, that's a powerful point. So it's basically both about changing the metric of what we measure, but also the speed of iteration, that we need to move forward faster.
Yeah. And the thing is, the good news is, I believe the potential's there, right? I believe that people in education, people outside of education, the potential, the wisdom, the knowledge of what we need to do is definitely there, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to be an educator to know what needs to be done. And in many ways, the job of an educator isn't to design it. That I've always believed that great educators are a bit like language translators, right? We're experts at translating really difficult concepts into stuff that's tangible. But if you expect us to create the language itself, it's never going to happen. So we need a broader sense of consensus, right? Comes back to a theme you and I have talked about before, which is collaboration. And actually breaking down borders. You know, if we're to design a future education system, it shouldn't be the responsibility of university professors or teachers. It should be the responsibility of society. The old African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child.
Yes.
Never been more important. The job of the educator is not to feel threatened by that expansive design and the collegiate nature of its design, because educators are still the professionals at the heart of it, because they are the experts in translating what needs to be taught into the way you teach it. So we need to have a much broader, much more consensual, much bigger conversation about the future of education, and then allow educators to translate it into stuff that becomes tangible to kids.
Definitely. Wow. I think you've given us a lot to think about moving forward, right?
Well, I hope so. This is the danger, Anna, of being stuck in a little white box for 10 months.
I think it's brilliant. I think you should get in there more often, actually.
Oh, God, no. Trust me, as soon as I've had that little jab in my arm, I'm just going to go round and inappropriately hug everyone I come across. That's it. That's as intellectual and cerebral as I'm going to be for the next few years. Trust me, you've got the best of me, because it's only going to be downhill from here.
Well, I love that, because I think you got to have that balance as well, right? You got to have both. So, because I mean, everything we've talked about revolves around ambidexterity. It's like the both and, to have both things. And I think when you've done your tour for a couple of years and hugged everybody, then you can go back in the box and talk about what you learned.
Fair enough, it's a deal. All right, I'm up for that.
Good. So we're just going to end off this thing because I know you've been writing while in your little box. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what's coming?
Sure, yeah, and you guys are the first to know about it. Honestly,
Yay!
you know, I don't say that to all the people. This is true. So I've been keeping it under kind of wraps while I've just been starting to craft it. So I've got a new book which I'm writing at the moment, which is actually written for teenagers between the age of about 14 and 19. Cool. So not young teenagers, because I wanted to write a book that wasn't patronizing, that wasn't talking down to young people. But one of the things I've felt for many years, and you know, we've touched on really in our conversation, but I've felt really acutely over the last 10 months, is very specifically to do with the way we develop our young people for their future. And you know, the really important, we talk a lot about soft skills being the hard currency for the 21st century, but we don't seem to be doing an awful lot about helping our young people develop those soft skills. True. So the working title of the book is called The Smarts. Right, you know that cool term, the smarts. I've got the smarts. You know, streetwiseness. Yes, and actually, it's a way of exploring with young people what those smarts maybe are and how they can nurture and develop them themselves. So there are 10 chapters. And at the moment, the smarts are broken down into those themes. So I'll let you know what they are. So I'm going to be talking about focus, the importance of focus, and how as a young person. So for example, I've done everything from talk about music and whether music's good or bad to help focus, and what kinds of music. You know, the impact phones and technology have. Really simple stuff, but stuff I think that could be of value, not just for kids, by the way. Mm-hmm. Being prepared, how to prepare yourself to deal with challenges, belief, the importance of belief and self-belief, grit, creativity, curiosity, resilience, courage, independence, and finally, the final chapter, which I hope will be the big, you know, the big fanfare sign off, is the importance of finding a deep sense of purpose. Ooh. And so that's the book. The challenge is writing it at a level which doesn't patronize, but is really accessible for young people. And hopefully I'll finish the first draft early in 2021. and I'm hoping it might be published by this time next year, but we'll see. But that's what I've been up to during lockdown, and I hope that when it evolves and comes out, it's of real use to kids. Really, I really do.
Well, just from the sound of it, yes, I think it's going to be. So, wow, that sounds some really important work, and I can't wait to read it. I'm not in your focus group, but I can't wait to read it.
Thank you. I'm hoping, part of me hopes commercially that parents will want to buy a copy for themselves too. That's my little secret right there. That grown-ups actually go, hold on, I need some of this, and I can sell double the numbers, and that way I can keep myself in chocolate cake, whether it's innovative or not.
Perfect. Perfect. I think that sounds like a plan.
I hope so. So yeah, that's what I'm up to at the moment. And as I say, hopefully I'll get the first draft done by the end of February, end of February, hopefully.
Sounds good. Well, we can't wait to see it, and the world can't wait to read it, I think, because that's something we all need. And I just thank you so much for talking to us about all of these things, because it's just conversations we need to have, and conversations that are hard and complex and multifaceted and amazing. And it's just so important that we take the time to kind of explore these questions together. And I love that you want to do that with us. And I just thank you so much for your time, Richard. This was so valuable.
Oh, it's honestly, Anna, it's been an honor and a pleasure. It's just lovely to have somebody to talk to, frankly.
Well, I'd love to come visit you in your white box.
You're on. Honestly, as soon as we're allowed, we'll meet up for a beer and have a less detailed conversation about something really frivolous. Wouldn't that be lovely for a change?
I would love that. Yes, that's a date. That's a date.
Fantastic.
All right, Richard, we're going to end this conversation for now, and I'm sure we'll keep in touch.
I hope so. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you so much. Bye.